Imagine escaping the clutches of the USSR, a regime known for silencing dissenters, and defying the KGB, the most feared intelligence agency in the world. Yuri Vetokhin didn't just escape, he risked his life to reveal the secrets of a system built on lies, fear, and betrayal. Welcome back to Mystery Vault. Today, we're diving into the thrilling and jaw-dropping life of Yuri Vetokhin, a man who didn't just walk away from the KGB, but revealed its darkest secrets. From his daring defection to the revelations that shook the intelligence world, Yuri's story is one of bravery, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of freedom. Stick around as we uncover his fascinating journey and the legacy he left behind. Our story begins in the Soviet Union in July of 1963. Yuri Vetokhin, at the time a 35-year-old engineer, was growing increasingly frustrated with the constricting system. The Soviet regime offered him little autonomy and little hope for real happiness. He yearned for a different life, a life that felt impossible within the borders of his homeland. With quiet determination, he began to plan his escape. Yuri worked at a research institute. Each day he would walk the crowded streets of the Soviet city to his institute and back home to his small communal living quarters. He had carefully crafted plans, and he knew he would need to be patient and meticulous in his preparation. One evening, he boarded his regular tram, but his mind was far away, filled with his vision of a future where he could truly be free. In his pocket, he kept his documents, money, and a ticket for his escape. It was the first step. He had obtained a ticket that would bring him south to a port city on the Black Sea, and from there, he would jump to his freedom. In August 1963, Yuri Vetokhin left his small apartment and traveled to Batumi, a port city on the Black Sea. After arriving, he checked into a modest room near the harbor, focused on the final phase of his escape. With everything in place, he was ready to execute his plan. That evening, Yuri ate his last meal in a local restaurant before heading to the restroom to change. He donned his swimming trunks, a woolen shirt, and a bow tie, all concealed under a raincoat's final disguise before the swim that would take him across the Black Sea to freedom. Once prepared, he stepped out into the streets of Batumi, now fully aware that Turkey's coast, just 15 kilometers away, was within reach. The rain had stopped, and border patrols were scattered, checking documents as people walked by. Yuri moved calmly through the city, avoiding attention, and made his way to Primorsky Park. As night began to fall, he found a spot near the park's palm trees to wait. The darkness provided the cover he needed, and he knew the searchlights would soon activate. He stood and took his clothing off and stuffed it in the net. He put on his mask and took the snorkel in his mouth. Grabbing the net with things, he walked into the sea and waited for a wave. When it came, he dove underwater and swam as far as he could, before surfacing for air through the snorkel. Looking back, he was 30 meters away from the shore. He allowed the net to drop to the bottom of the sea, freeing himself from that extra weight, and swam like a sprinter. Within seconds, the searchlights turned on, and the water was lit up all around him. He dove as deep as he could and stayed there, desperate for air. When he could hold his breath no longer, he surfaced. He took a deep breath of the sea air. He had managed to swim over 100 meters in just 1 minute. He had cut his snorkel to a minimal length to avoid detection. A fog was rolling in, and it started to rain. He threw off his mask and snorkel as the searchlights could not reach him anymore. He changed his course to swim toward the sea, not toward the shore, but he did not realize the strong current would be there. He lost track of his direction as trees and debris floated around him. He regretted ditching his mask so soon. With no way of seeing, he used his compass and flashlight to find his way. Finally, A hazy, foggy morning arrived. The wind had calmed, but the sea was still rough. He was glad to see a shoreline to the left, which meant he had been swimming in the right direction all night, towards Turkey. But was he still in Soviet waters? He saw mountains on the horizon, which meant it was Turkey. Suddenly, a plane appeared in the sky to the left. As the plane grew bigger, it became apparent that it was a Soviet passenger plane. The realization that his escape attempt had failed pierced his brain. He had been swimming in the wrong direction. Heartbroken, he turned around and swam back towards the Soviet shoreline. The sea was desolate. He was swimming fast, but the city of Batumi was still not in sight. He began to feel tired and cold. He knew he needed to move faster to get warm. He swam towards the northwest and came ever closer to the shore. To his surprise, he saw a sandy beach and not a single person in sight, just a completely deserted shore. If he had been told before that there was a place like this in the region, he would not have believed it. He was ready to step onto the shore when he noticed a border guard sitting by the water. When he disappeared, he made for the beach. His foot finally touched the sand after 17 or 18 hours in the water. He removed his shirt and used it for a pillow. He checked his watch, but it had stopped. By the sun, he figured it was about 8:00 in the morning. He needed to move to get to Batumi. He walked along the beach in his swimming trunks. He continued on the road as the darkness descended. The lights from the city appeared, but it was now night. He could see the lights of searchlights all around. He had been walking for a while when he came across some men near a multi-story building. One of them approached him and asked, "Were you robbed?" He told them he was fine, but asked where a tourist camp was. This was a mistake. He had given himself away. The man disappeared and returned with a policeman. He asked him for his documents. Yuri provided his passport and was taken into custody. The police took him to a small one-story building where he was surrounded by police and border guards. The policeman reported that he had found him by the sea in only swimming trunks and presented him to the officer who held his passport. The officer began to question him. He told him he was vacationing in Batumi. The officer asked how he got to Poti. It was then that Yuri realized that the shoreline was unfamiliar because he had failed to reach Turkey, but instead found himself in Poti. The officer demanded that he show them what he was holding, and when the officer unpacked the contents of the shirt, he was clearly suspicious. The officer told him to take his clothing off, and the soldier took his trunks and cap to be inspected. After dressing, Yuri sat on a chair as the interrogation continued. "How did you get from Batumi to Poti?" the officer asked. "By swimming? How?" "Just by swimming." The officer was incredulous. "But it is 60 kilometers from Batumi to Poti. I am a marathon swimmer," Yuri replied. The officer continued, "You'll have to be detained for clarification. Tomorrow you will be able to show us the place where you came out of the water onto the shore." He did not know that this was not the end, but merely the beginning of his struggle with the Soviet system. Yuri's capture was the beginning of a new ordeal, a descent into a system designed to break the human spirit. He was held in the damp, cold basement of the KGB building, his mind racing, trying to make sense of the swift turn of events. His dreams of freedom were replaced by the stark reality of confinement. He was to be tested like never before, both mentally and physically. Every morning he was escorted upstairs for interrogation, facing a table surrounded by instruments of communication and surveillance. The officer, a man named Lysov, was harsh and brutal. He began the interrogation with a cold formality: name, origin, family. He was searching for any weakness he could use to break Yuri, but Yuri remained stoic. When they started to discuss the reason for his presence in the sea and in the proximity of Turkey, Yuri began to play a game of cat and mouse with the officer, providing only plausible but unhelpful, truthful-sounding answers. They accused him of attempting to escape behind the border. Yuri's response was not denial, but a counter-argument. How was that a crime? Was he not permitted to leave if he chose? He quoted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which stipulated that every person has the right to leave any country. The officer became angry. Where did you learn about such rights? In their world, freedom of movement was a crime. They accused him of plotting with the Americans and then questioned him as to why he took documents, money, and photos with him. He had a reason for each one. Everything he said made sense, but the interrogators refused to believe him. They were there to break him, to get him to admit his guilt and confess to his crimes. But Yuri held firm. He was an engineer, a scientist, and they couldn't understand why he would ever leave such a comfortable and respectable life. They accused him of anti-Soviet thought, and in a rage, the officer threatened that he would show him what he was capable of. It was clear to Yuri they wanted a confession, not the truth. He would not give it to them. Finally, an investigator came forward, Lieutenant Koval. He would oversee Yuri's case. Yuri understood it was the start of a new struggle. He had to decide how he would handle the next stage. The officer was going to do all he could to force him to incriminate himself, and he understood he would have to be very cautious with his answers, to give them what they wanted, but not to destroy his ability to get out of this mess. He was alone, and he would have to rely on his strength. Yuri was taken to a pre-trial detention center and placed in a cell with another man. The other prisoner seemed very interested in how Yuri ended up swimming in the sea. After several days, the authorities took him to yet another detention center, where he was forced to read the Soviet criminal code. His article was now reclassified as a much more severe crime. Treason, a crime punishable by imprisonment for 10 to 15 years or by death. Yuri had been sentenced by the system to the maximum punishment. The following day, he was transferred once more and was now classified as prone to escape. Each transit took him farther away from any hope of liberation. He was taken to a mental hospital in Simferopol. This was to test him, to see if he was mentally fit to stand trial, or if he was in fact mentally unstable. This would become his new battle. He was not ill, he just wanted to be free. In the psychiatric hospital, he found himself in a world of strange sights. He was interviewed by doctors and staff, each one probing his mind for flaws, for cracks in the facade of sanity that the Soviet Union had deemed to exist. For each test and each question, he had to think of a strategy to reveal as little about himself as possible. He knew that if they considered him mentally unstable, he would never achieve his goal. They had taken everything from him, and now they were trying to take his sanity. After what seemed like an eternity of examinations and interrogations, the doctors declared him mentally fit. They would not find a chink in his armor. Yuri was now in a special psychiatric hospital, a place that was far more insidious than any prison. This was a place where they were not only trying to break him, but also rewrite his mind. He was now deemed mentally ill, and the doctors who were his captors were not interested in healing him. He was sentenced to a permanent stay in a system designed to destroy his will and his soul. He was placed in a large room, crowded with other patients who were little more than shadows of their former selves. He had seen many terrible things, but this place was different. Here, there was no physical violence, only a quiet, slow form of torture. The staff did not shout at him. They simply forced him to consume medications that stole his vitality. He was given an assortment of pills which he began to spit out when no one was looking. The doctors had taken his hope, but they had also given him an opportunity. There was a small window of freedom within the hospital routine. He was given a chance to be a clerk in the food hall. He was now in charge of the distribution of food, and with it, he gained a new understanding of his situation. Then, after much thought, he decided to give them what they wanted. He would temporarily submit. He asked for a piece of paper and wrote a confession. and claimed he was mentally ill and he agreed to never try to escape again. The lie worked. The doctors, believing they had succeeded, reduced his medications. Slowly, his health improved, his body returned, and his mind cleared. He was released, and they had deemed him as cured, but it was still a prison without walls. After leaving the psychiatric hospital, he walked the streets, feeling the weight of his worn clothes and the black duffel bag that contained all of his worldly possessions. It was time to start training again, both body and mind. He began to visit the local pool, swimming, and preparing to be a swimmer again. His old plan of swimming from the shore was impossible now. He would have to find another way to fulfill his destiny. He knew the time was coming. He now knew he had to swim from a boat. He began to examine ships in port. He worked hard, selling his wares and saving up for the tour, the one tour that he believed would bring his ultimate escape. He knew he would use it to get away. He needed to find a way to get into the sea unnoticed and then swim as far away as possible. With the paperwork in place and everything packed, he traveled to Vladivostok. He had learned from the past, and now would be his time to shine. The ship departed, and he spent his days on deck, looking out for an opportunity. He was studying charts and was making a detailed plan. He learned all he could about the ship and about the surrounding sea. He learned that they would be crossing the equator. He would make his move there. He spent the last evening carefully preparing himself for what was to come. He had his documents secured, had his supplies with him, and he wore his clothes designed to ward off any sharks. He went to his cabin, locked the door, and headed for the porthole. His time had come. He climbed out the porthole and fell into the ocean. His escape had begun. He had waited all of his life, and now it was time to be free. Yuri was in the water, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt the cold shock of the ocean, but at that moment, fear was absent. The ship was behind him. The time had come for him to take control of his destiny. He quickly removed the life jacket, tossing it aside, hoping the authorities would see it and believe that he had drowned. His thoughts were clear and focused, his mission his only priority. He needed to swim as fast as he could, to get far away before the ship came looking for him. He swam toward the stars he knew so well. After a while, he was able to see an island in the distance, a beacon of hope on the horizon. He swam as hard as he could, as far as he could. His body was aching, his eyes were burning, and he was thirsty. He was exhausted, but he kept going, and then he saw a sign, a buoy, which was seemingly connected to the island. It was all he needed, and he swam to it, making for the shore. And then he felt the bottom. He collapsed onto the stones, his body exhausted, his eyes burning, but he was free. Then he was awoken by the sounds of a boat passing near him. He could not move. He was too tired. The boat moved by, but then it returned, and they took him aboard. They did not speak English, but they were friendly. They gave him water and food. He was being helped. He was brought to a small village where they welcomed him with open arms. He was taken to a house where he was cared for and where he felt the grace of humanity again. He washed and changed his clothes. He was given food, and he was finally able to rest. The leader of the village, a man who spoke English, came to see him. He asked where he was from and what had happened to him, and Yuri told him everything, his desire to reach the United States. The man listened intently, and when Yuri was finished, he promised that he would do all he could to help. He was safe. He was transferred to the capital, where he was interviewed by representatives of the Indonesian government. They questioned him and tested him. They even made contact with the Soviet embassy, but he refused their offer to return home. Finally, he was taken to a meeting with the American consul and he filled out paperwork and told his story. At the airport, as he boarded the plane to freedom, he said goodbye to those who had helped him. He was grateful to the people who had believed him. He was going to the United States. As the plane took to the sky, Yuri looked back at his life in Russia and at the long, difficult journey he had endured for the chance to be free. It had taken him 20 years, countless failed plans, beatings, isolation, torture, and the loss of everything he had. His journey had come to an end. Yuri Vetokhin's escape is a powerful testament to the human spirit's resilience against oppression. His journey, marked by relentless pursuit and brutal imprisonment, was driven by an unwavering belief in freedom. His life demonstrates that even the darkest times can be overcome with courage, perseverance, and a refusal to give up. He never gave up, and he found his freedom. Yuri Vetokhin passed away on March 6, 2022. If you found his journey as fascinating and unsettling as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated on more mysterious and gripping tales here at Mystery Vault.